Welcome. We are in our recording session of HSABC's podcast with Erik Blaney and Courtney Harrop. I'm super grateful to have you both here with us today. Thank you for taking the time out of your busy schedules. And I guess before we get going into the nitty-gritty of this podcast and interview, if you would like to take a moment to explain to our audience a little bit about yourselves and who you are.
Go ahead.
Hi, everybody. My name is Courtney Harrop, and I'm the Harm Reduction Coordinator for Tla'amin Nation. My background is of Scottish and Ukrainian ancestry, so I come from a family of immigrants to these lands, and I currently live and work in Tla'amin territory in the Cathet Regional District.
And your traditional name is?
Nana Mostam, gifted to me by Elder Elsie Paul in Tla'amin. Thanks, Erik.
Ajitepot Tiapthot Atnan. My traditional name is Tiapthot, which comes from my great times 5 grandfather, which was also given to me by my aunt Elsie Paul. And my English name is Erik Blaney, and I come from the Tla'amin territory, Tla'amin and Hamalko ancestry, and born and raised in the region here. Background, spent 21 years in the first responder firefighter service, and my last 2 years as deputy chief and fire chief for the Tla'amin Nation. So thanks for having me.
Oh, fantastic. Thanks. And so as I was doing research into this podcast, I saw the Blaney family name come up quite a bit in news articles and all across the website. So I thought maybe it would benefit the listeners to have a bit of more context around your family's history within the nation and culture.
Yeah, sure. My family, well, the Blaney name is, it comes from my grandfather's side, who was born up on the Orford River up in Butte Inlet. So my grandfather, Chega Jamu, English name is Bob Blaney, was born and raised up in the Glacial Inlet, up in Butte Inlet, the Hamalko territory. And they were moved to Church House in the early days, and he lived there till he was about 13 years old, before the police and the priests moved them to the current village site here in Tishilsum, where my other side of the family is from, which is the Galagos Francis side of the family. And here we live today. And what is really interesting is that our family's been here for a very long time. It's interesting to say that we found one of the oldest archaeological sites right outside the fire hall this year. And actually the parking lot of the fire hall, which came back with a 10,000-year-old date. So our family has been here for at least 10,000 years.
Wow, that's big news.
Yeah, I think it makes us the oldest continually lived-in village site in the province now with that find.
That's incredible because, yeah, I know that there's people who like to dispute how long nations have been here for, and this whole concept of terra nullius, which is could be a podcast all unto itself. But that's incredible. And then Courtney, as a settler and someone who's moved into the nation, I saw in my research again that you come to Tla'amin after having worked in Victoria. So I thought maybe you could provide the listeners a little bit of history about how you came to find yourself where you are.
Yeah, I actually worked at the nation for quite a number of years in the supported child development program. So at the daycare in Tla'amin, supporting children and families with special needs, and being integrated into schools and all that sort of thing. And then COVID happened, and we I sort of started the journey into harm reduction services and supports off the side of my desk while I was doing that job. And then as COVID progressed, I accepted an offer from First Nations Health Authority to take on a harm reduction educator and coordinator position for the North Island, the North Vancouver Island region. So supporting probably between 15 and communities between Comox Valley and Port Hardy, Kinkom Inlet, Alert Bay, and surrounding areas, and also had some opportunity to work with some of the Nachalmouth nations as well while I was in that role. And then Flamen got to a place where they were able to create a position for a harm reduction coordinator within the nation. So I came back to working in my community where I live.
Oh, that's incredible. Yeah. So I apologize. I misunderstood the context. I thought from the research that you had come over from the island, but that's incredible that you've been able to live and work within the community where you've spent most of your time.
Yeah.
So I guess more to the subject at hand, or what's brought us together, is all of that program and implementation that happened during the lockdowns. I understand that, or at least from what I gathered, the community was isolated and everything was in lockdown. And so you all had to find ways to support yourselves and the community, kind of isolated from other inputs. So if you wanted to speak to what that looked like.
Yeah, it was a challenging time. I mean, COVID took everybody by surprise, and nobody was really well prepared for it. We were somewhat prepared and fortunate that we did have a very old emergency plan that I did back in 2012 that covered some of the pandemic stuff. And Tla'amin is fortunate enough to have a full complement of firefighters and first responders within the community, as well as most of the tools needed to handle emergencies within the community. So we were the second Indigenous community to have a major outbreak, and we had, in the end, about 37 COVID cases out of 680 people in the community. And this came at a time when you were watching the news and there was mass burials happening in New York, and nobody knew how bad COVID was. There was questions about ventilators and bed space, and being in a remote community, we knew we had 2 ventilators in the city, Kathet Hospital Regional District, and all the patients were going to be transported to Vancouver who ended up with COVID. So it was a scary time. I still remember the day I got the phone call from one of our community members who had a sore throat and a sniffly nose, and I begged her to take a COVID test. And by 10 a.m. the next day, we realized we had it in the community, and the list of contacts was huge. And I remember the contact tracer phoning me saying, "Shut it down, shut your village down, go into lockdown." And that's exactly what we did. So it was put on the fire department to initiate the emergency protocols, go to shelter in place. We locked down the community, and this was after the Alert Bay lockdown. So Alert Bay had been locked down for about 2 weeks prior to us. And we learned a lot from their emergency program and their chief and council on exactly what they did. And we kind of created that response that met our needs within the community. Although our outbreak was the largest outbreak per capita in all of Canada at the time. So it was really scary times for our department. Lots of tireless, we didn't sleep for days, maybe 30, 40 minutes.
Weeks, 2 weeks at least.
I can still sore from sleeping in my Suburban. But through that, I kind of realized as the fire chief what the Emergency Act did for us. And when I reached out to the local RCMP and realized that we were not getting any help from anybody outside the community, really made me realize that we had to do things differently, and we had to um, survive ourselves with what we had. And we did depend on people outside the community dropping food off at the checkpoint. But after about day 3 or 4, the nation's most vulnerable population, the at-risk population, started to become an issue for us. So everybody was pretty good about sheltering in place, but we had a few crafty folks who knew the back trails and knew how to get to the dealers' houses, and they were the ones that were out and about. And it was hard to keep them from spreading COVID. So we had, one dealer in the community who had COVID, who was still actively dealing drugs, and people were picking up from him and spreading through the community. So it became a transmission point. So we knew we had to address that, and we knew we had to try and keep people home. So that was our first mission, and that was probably a good 2-3 day mission to try and pull together a plan to say, okay, we need to keep these people home, but we also need to keep them safe. So now they're going to be using alone. So that's where Courtney became crafty, and we worked with locals, Catherine Colby and crew, to get as much naloxone as we could into the community and have that distributed. And that worked out well, because as a fire chief, we're now responsible for extricating people who are sick, and we also have to have firefighters for when there's a fire. So it turned into kind of me and Courtney being that first responder crew to go to any of the ILI calls, any of the people with COVID. And then we saved the firefighters to stay at home just in case there was a fire, keep them away from any of the COVID, any of the fire hall, going to any of the calls. So we had to come up with all these standard operating procedures and ways to do gross decon, ways to distribute alcohol and drugs. That was probably day, 7 or 8, where I said, we need clean drugs. We hear people are making stuff in their kitchen sink with whatever they can find. So what is a good stimulant that we can use? Where can I get clean heroin? Like, where can I get clean drugs? And I thought, as a fire chief, I'd be trying to, find drugs to distribute in my community. So that's where we're able to, tap into some of those folks and some of my relatives who really helped out in doing check-ins. My uncle was doing check-ins on people, making sure they had food and toilet paper and the basic necessities, but also finding out how they were doing with their drug use, making sure that they had access to cleaning supplies. He was going to the drug dealers' houses and saying, hey, people are coming to your house with COVID, so make sure you're cleaning your handles. You got kids in your house. So we're giving him Clorox wipes and disinfectant wipes, and showing them how to use masks and stuff, so that the drug dealers weren't becoming that transmission point anymore. And then working with the local crew in town, I remember making that phone call saying, hey, we need clean drugs out here. And saw it as a huge opportunity to get safe supply set up. So that happened. And I got pushback. I got quite a bit of pushback from some leadership who are very against any drugs or alcohol in the community. And I just said, well, you go sit at the end of that driveway and make sure they stay home every night for the next 2 weeks. That'll be your job. The RCMP gave me some grief as well when they found out I had a car full of heroin coming out to the reserve, and they said, oh, we're going to stop that car. And I said, the hell you are. Do you know what powers I have under the Emergency Act? And I said, I can fly 1 kilogram or 2 of cocaine from Mexico right on that field, and you're going to do absolutely nothing about it. So they understood pretty quickly that their resources were tapped. And I said, if we're now going into homes where we have toxic drug supply, and then we have a house fire 3 days later, now all my firefighters have been exposed, and they have to be on mandatory quarantine. So now we have no firefighters. So we're going to be leaning on the town firefighters to come in for any fires. So building all that as we went was pretty fun, I think, but also very challenging. In the end, it came down to safety. So now we have the safe supply. So how do we distribute it? So now I'm driving around in a fire chief Suburban with safe supply. I don't even know what was in these grocery bags, and I'm meeting people at the end of trails. And during that work, it was amazing. These people who I had judged for years and I didn't want to be a part of anything that had to do with them, really. They were opening up. They were saying, this has really changed me. And I now see, what this addiction is doing to me and my community. And I promise you, because you've taken such good care of us through this, that once this lockdown is over, I'm going to go to treatment and I'm going to get help. And I know at least 3 people who I dealt with through that whole lockdown, they have got that help and they are now, clean. And that I think was huge to see. But I'll let Courtney speak a little bit about it as well.
Yeah, I think probably one of the most valuable things that we were able to do during that time was around, providing people with safe and reasonable access to what they need to support them to be able to actually sustain staying home during that lockdown. And, we worked with our partners in town. Erik mentioned Catherine Colby and the harm reduction team at Vancouver Coastal Health were a big support and a big help. We were able to do some pop-up tents. So I think we hosted 3 pop-ups where, we were able to say to the folks at the checkpoints, hey, if you see folks, walking by going to the health center, like, don't bother them. They're available to do that. And we did, we set up, little tarp tents with tables, and we're providing harm reduction supplies, safe use supplies, clean pipes, syringes, all those harm reduction supplies that harm reduction services provide. But we also had the opportunity to have a prescribing doctor attend those and be able to actually provide prescriptions to people with what they needed to be able to stay at home. And then we were able to have those prescriptions delivered. So the pharmacy was still delivering medications to the village during the lockdown. And we were able to support people that way as well. So that was really big. And, probably the first time that something like that has happened, definitely in our community, where, we're in a situation and, doctors who can prescribe these medications came directly to community and were willing to take people on that they had maybe never met before, or who were may not a direct patient of theirs. But the fact that they came and were willing to do that and support that work with us was a really big deal. And I think the impact of that has really carried forward in a good way, especially in the nation, because really, in Tla'amin, there was not these resources or these, kinds of programs available in the community at the time. And it was really figuring out the community needs in a crisis that got us to the place where we are now. Erik mentioned his uncle Chegajemu, Kevin Blaney, and he was a harm reduction warrior in the community. And unfortunately, he's not with us anymore, but he had big dreams in harm reduction and community, and in supporting not only his community but other Indigenous communities in harm reduction and substance use support. And now we're in that place where we're really able to push his big dreams forward, and we're really making it happen. The nation has graciously provided us a space to run all of our harm reduction programs and services from. We have a name now, Ajamet Harm Reduction Circle, and we're doing lots of really incredible things, and providing low barrier employment for people with lived and living experience with substance use was another big thing that's kind of come out with some of the programming. So yeah, we're offering all kinds of really amazing things, but we wouldn't probably be here if it wasn't for that work that we had to do to keep people alive and safe during that lockdown.
Wow, that's incredible. Yeah, I can't imagine having to navigate all of that, like, in the moment, in response to everything that's going on, and then the complicated layers of, like, nation to nation relations and, like, the bureaucratic kind of red tape that gets involved, right? Where you have to be on calls with fire chiefs and police officers. So, but it's amazing that through I feel like life has this theme, reoccurring pattern where our biggest challenges are like generally lead to our greatest gifts. And so now this beautiful thing has developed in your community as a response or as a result of all this beautiful and albeit heavy work. So that's really incredible. And so I guess, well, why don't you tell me more about, sorry, it was the Argument Harm Reduction Circle?
Yeah, Ajamet. Um,
Argument.
yeah, and so Ajamet Harm Reduction Circle is who we are in providing those harm reduction services and supports and programs within the Tla'amin community as well as our Cathet Regional District to support all Indigenous folks in the region with harm reduction services. Our name Ajamet came from was a gift, and it came from work that Kevin Blaney was doing with his mom and dad around translating some of the Tla'amin, so translating harm reduction language and phrases into Tla'amin language as a way to bring culture and language into the harm reduction programming that he was supporting at the time. So when I was hired, I consulted with his mom and dad and with our cultural coordinator, Drew Blaney, as well, to work on the translation and the correct spelling and pronunciation. Ajamet, and Ajamet means a beautiful, safe place to go, and that was Kevin's biggest dream was to have a dedicated standalone space to do this work from in community. And so we had our grand opening in September of 2022. And we've been providing services, workshops, education. We have fully stocked cupboards with safe use supplies. We provide community and staff based naloxone and overdose response training. We currently have, excuse me, 4 people with lived and living experience working as peer support in our program, and all of them are Tla'amin members. So that's really amazing. And Kevin and another community member were kind of the first 2 peers that we ever had, and that was back during the COVID times. And then we're able to add a few more, but they were working through 2021. And they were being supported by a different agency because Tla'amin didn't have a program yet. So once the program got stood up and I was able to take that position as the harm reduction coordinator, we transitioned our peers who were working in town to come back to working in their home community in the village. And it's been really great. We've carried on some of Kevin's programs as well. We do a weekly hot lunch drop-in program so that our peers cook and we serve community. Anybody is welcome to attend. All of our programs, of course, are primarily focused on harm reduction and substance use, and we invite people with lived and living experience, family members, community members, leadership, health staff to attend anything and everything that we offer if that's something that interests them or if they need those supports.
Wow, that's incredible and a beautiful and safe place to go, Ajamet. It brings to mind for me Mino Bimatswin, which is an Anishinaabe word, which means the good life, but it means so much more than that. So on my mother's side, I'm Ojibwe from Garden River back east. So I've been trying to like reconnect with the language and the culture. And that to me just like really stood out because I have also come from a place of like past youth substance use and homelessness. And so, really, like, you know, I spend a lot of time thinking about what it means to live a good life and trying to walk in that way. And so to see these programs come up in community and to see the drive of community, I think, to care for itself is really what it is. And to see that represented in the language and in these like deeper, more metaphorical meanings and spiritual meanings that I find to be absent in English a lot of the times is really, really beautiful. So kudos to you folks. That's absolutely incredible. And has there been like a positive general reception from the wider community, would you say?
I think for the most part, yes. Um, I mean, some of this stuff is new for people when we talk about harm reduction, and what does that mean, and because it can encompass so much. But we start with the conversation, right, and let the conversation lead us to where we need to go with folks. And we have a lot of folks that um, drop in, just show up for lunch, and they're like, wow, I had no idea, like, how amazing this is. And now they're weekly regulars, right? Or have started bringing their families or come to our workshops. We have a few elders who are quite active in some of the programs that we do, which is really wonderful. And there's some knowledge keepers who participate in some of our programs. One of our peers is a knowledge keeper and an elder, and he's really been working hard on relearning his language, so that he's able to share more language with the folks that participate in some of our programs or come to us for our supports. We've been working with a local Tom and Media collective around the interior design of our space. So our space will be filled with language and culture through posters and photographs, and hopefully soon a mural. So yeah, we're just getting a couple other programs up and running. We're building our traditional medicine garden, and just, really thinking about those wraparound approaches to wellness, and realizing that everybody's in a different place in their wellness journey, but we're all kind of traveling that journey together. So most folks, I haven't heard really too much in the way of like negative feedback, though Erik might have. Yeah.
Not to put you on the spot or anything, Erik.
Yeah, well, my other role in the community is an elected leader, and my first time in politics. So it's interesting to see all perspectives and get complaints. In this position, you're kind of damned if you do and damned if you don't. And if you're not pissing off at least one person, you're not doing your job right. So I hate politics, and it's because of my Uncle Kevin that I'm here. He called a family meeting and said, we need you, and you're running. So I didn't really have much choice when my grandparents and Kevin told me that I was going to be becoming political. So I blame him. But we get a lot of complaints. We are a treaty nation. We're a modern day treaty nation. We've worked our way out of poverty, but we still have a lot of the systemic issues that we've been dealing with, for the last 150 years. We still have a major housing shortage. Our current list right now, we need about 110 homes in the next 5 years. We need 68 immediately. So a lot of the complaints that do come in are typically around housing, access to housing. Why do the people with addictions get put into emergency housing, yet me and my family don't do drugs, and we're still on the list waiting in Vancouver for a house? Things like that, and we went from a very hard stance and a very hard line for the last number of years. Banishment, if you're a drug dealer, you're going to be banished. And if you're, running around stealing from everybody and there's no support, it's kind of, you go to jail. And repeat that cycle many times, and then you get banished from the community. You're just not welcome here anymore. And that comes from our tradition, pre-contact. If somebody wasn't doing right, then there were consequences. So there's a bit of the colonial aspect as well as the old traditional aspect of doing wrong and how that's dealt with in the community. So it's only been probably 3 years where you have a little bit of acceptance from those folks who typically never had any acceptance at all. And for some other politicians who have drawn that firm line and are absolutely don't want to participate, you got to break it down to them financially. How much is this costing the community when they're not supported? They're now taking advantage of their aunt or their mom, or they're stealing from, continually stealing from the same people, elders in the community, taking advantage. So why don't we just give them what they need, right? So they're breaking in to steal smoked salmon from Auntie. Let's feed them. Let's make them soup every day. They're breaking in and they want to do laundry somewhere. Let's give them a place to do their laundry. They're trying to get cab money to go to town. Well, let's get them a ride to town. It's a little bit easier on society by supporting those who are in need. But I also see the other side of things too. As a business owner in the community as well, it's really hard to support those who are constantly stealing from you as well. I think we lose a couple $1,000s a year from my own relatives who continually steal from my organization. And it's like, call the cops and go through the system and get them a fine or put them in jail for 3 months. But how does that get talked about at the Christmas dinner table? So it's hard to keep stacking up losses financially and remain optimistic and supportive. But as Michael Kevin said, you were once there. I come from addiction as well. I was raised in a way where I had a lot of trauma growing up, and I self-medicated till the time I was 19, 20, and it was tough. And there wasn't this kind of support when I was younger. So I was having a chat with a couple other folks and said, yeah, if you want to be a drug addict, this is a place to be. You got everything going for you. Free rides to town, free food, laundry. You're very well supported. And it was kind of it was a joke comment, but I thought, you know what? Yeah, we're supporting people. We're taking care of our family members. And, unfortunately, we've lost quite a few. But they didn't have the opportunity to turn things around. And that's what I think this is all about, is, trying to support those to turn things around. And it seems to be, we're in the very early days, but it seems to be working for most.
Yeah, that's fantastic to hear. And I get that must be like a really delicate position to hold and to maintain and to try to, because yeah, you are damned if you do and you're damned if you don't. But I'm glad to hear that, if it's creating positive impact, hopefully that will eventually speak for itself. And I think, yeah, it can be hard to like support people when we see them like damaging themselves or the community around us. But, when you come from those places, that kind of level of acceptance is then where genuine change can begin to grow from, because you do feel accepted and you feel valued and needed. And then that lends itself to a place of healing and more holistic well-being. So what do you think then, like next steps? What would that look like for your community? Further implementation? Is there other things that you're looking at as a means to support the community?
Now I see Erik.
Probably got a whole list.
I was going to say, I see you looking at me. Yeah, I mean, we're doing some pretty groundbreaking work in Plowman and in the Cathet region with some of our community partners. The community action team, we're quite involved with our local community action team. And actually, I just came from our monthly meeting, and that was wonderful. There's lots of stuff coming up over the next year. We just, I guess it was not last week, but the week before, hosted the Walk With Me team from Vancouver Island, and they were here sharing some guided story walks, which are the stories that have been collected from people with lived and living experience in the Comox Valley as well as in Campbell River. So definitely check out their website, walkwithme.ca. It's quite a big project, and we are going to be moving forward in developing our relationship and collaboration with the Walk With Me team. So a couple of our Adjamet team are heading down to support Walk With Me and Simon Fraser University and Vancouver Coastal Health this week with a few walks in Vancouver. Walk With Me is releasing a report all about their project and their work. So we're going to be doing some of that with them, and hopefully in the very near future, we'll be developing a cassette version of Walk With Me. So doing some story recordings and adding some voices to their toolkit in their project. We also have just started offering drug checking services with the FTIR spectrometer here in our region. So that's a collaboration with Common Health, the BC Centre for Substance Use, Vancouver Coastal Health, and Lift Community Services. So we will be sharing that machine with Lift Community Services. So we will have it a few days a week in Common, and then Lift will operate service in the town center a few days a week to provide 7-day-a-week on-site point of care drug checking services. So that's like really like the biggest deal ever, because we are the only rural and remote community in the Vancouver Coastal Health region providing FTIR services, and we are the only Indigenous nation in the country offering drug checking right in First Nations community. So that's also like a pretty big deal. So we'll be expanding some of those services as we move forward. Like I said, we're building our traditional medicine garden, and we'll be growing some food and hopefully creating some more low barrier employment for people who use drugs, which is also just a really great thing. It's been really wonderful having our 4 peers providing peer support to folks in community, just really to see them grow and to be so proud of the work that they're doing and the impact that they're having saving lives in this community, because they are saving lives every day with the work that they do. And so really lift up our peers and our people with lived experience as the experts in all of the work that we're doing. And it's been really great. So we're, moving forward into summer. I'm sure we're probably going to have a bunch of community barbecues and hopefully have people come and hang out with us and hang out in the garden and just work on wellness together and continue to just meet people where they're at in their journey. And, we're here for anybody who wants to pop by and visit and hang out and access some services.
Awesome. Thank you, Courtney. Erik, did you have anything you wanted to add to that?
No, I think, I, as Courtney said, want to really hold up the folks that are doing the hard work. And, just watching this bloom from my uncle's dream to a phone call to me every Friday to this is your chance, do it. And seeing it all really come together and happen, delivering food to those in need, providing safe supply, having a space. The only other one that we haven't done was the mobile response unit yet, but I think that will come.
Oh yeah, I forgot to mention that's on the list for the coming year. So
I knew it was.
The Chegamobile is coming.
So his dream was for him and I to be driving around in a vehicle doing a response, and it would have been, doing the check-ins, delivering food, but also doing overdose response within the community in a safe way. providing food. I mean, after Kevin passed, I got out of the food business and donated all my food stuff to Lyft, and I see them putting together beautiful meals and cooking and using that equipment. So, all of this happened because of my uncle's dream, and a lot of it happened due to the emergency situation and the opportunity that we saw to take it into our own hands and provide what was needed, without any policy, without any bureaucratic process, without any handcuffs on. And to see that what we did is now becoming the norm, and we were able to prove it through a very crappy situation that it works, and it's done good, and it saved lives. And now that we've dropped the pebble in the pond, we're seeing all these other programs starting up and firing up and having some creative freedom to do what they need to do. It's amazing, and I'm glad I was a part of the beginning of it.
Me too.
Yeah, it sounds like you guys have done some really, really incredible work, and to like create these like life-saving implementations and programming and connecting people. I think that's really what it's about, right? Learning to be self-sustaining, but not as individuals, collectively, and to like really uplift each other. I think that that's one of the better lessons that maybe could come out of the craziness that was 2020 and 2021.
Yeah. And
And
really people having an opportunity to, like you say, find those connections in their home community, on their land, with their people, and, reconnecting to culture, to language, to family, right? Like we're developing a managed alcohol program. We dispense OAT medication out of our health center, being able to bring these services to be available in community so people don't have to travel 20 minutes to go get their medication at the pharmacy, or to go get their pour for the day, or whatever that might look like, right? And with a lot of these programs, I think one of the most beautiful things that we've been able to witness is people reconnecting with their families and with their community and with community members, as things progress, right? Like we've supported people who maybe haven't seen their grandkids for a number of months or years, due to their substance use, who are now able to see their grandkids again and start to be continuing to build those relationships with family. And I think that's really like at the root of that is those connections and reconnections that are so valuable.
yeah, absolutely. Thank you for saying that, because I couldn't agree more. And I really felt that in my soul, being 4,500 kilometers away from home and away from my family, which for the most part is probably for the better. But it's beautiful to hear that, like, because you can't overcome that like physical distance. And when you can, and then even if things aren't perfect, you have the opportunity to slowly rebuild these connections, right? And that's really, I think, really healing, both for the individual and communities. And then you get these connections of like change makers and people, you know like you were saying earlier about the low barrier employment. I feel like that is so key, because like when you have limited access to resources, then you can't, even if you're desiring to make change in your life, it becomes really difficult. And I remember when I was trying to break out of the shelter life, no one would hire me because I had a shelter address on my resume, and how limiting that was, right? And so when you create this employment, then you get people who are like doing positive work for their community, in their community, and able to like maintain a living wage, which is exactly what we're going for, right? Is people to be employed meaningfully in their lives and create change
Yeah.
in their community. So that's really beautiful. Well, thank you so much for taking the time to sit with us today. It was an amazing conversation. If there's anything you'd like to share, add, reflect on before, or to bring to the audience before we go, I'm happy to create space for that.
Final words, Courtney.
I don't think I have any final words. We covered so much. What about you?
Yeah, well, I just say get her done. Do what needs to be done. And as Indigenous people, you have the autonomy and the rights and title to your land, and you have the inherited duty to your people to take care of everybody and kind of meet them where they're at. And it's not easy. It's going to be tough and challenging, but it's something that we all must do.
Well said. Aho. Well, thank you so much. And we'll catch you in the next one. And Erik, maybe we'll have to have you back on to talk about inherited rights and duties and nations. That would be an interesting conversation all on its own.
Yeah, sounds good.
Miigwech, thank you both. Take care.
Thank you.
Bye.